Hi, I'm Dan Cortopassi. Today I'm doing a retro review of this N-scale Norfolk and Western Class J 484 locomotive from Bachmann. A retro review is a product review of a model that is not a recent release and may be out of production. Examples can often be found on the used market. Also, unlike a normal product review, I may have made modifications to the model. I'll make a note of those, if any, as they come up. I bought this model in late 2016, and at that time the model was DCC ready and had an MSRP of $229. Unfortunately, I no longer have a record of what I actually paid for it. A quick eBay search revealed current prices anywhere from just under $100 to $439. Most of the higher priced offerings had DCC and sound installed. For comparison, I also found an N-scale Sunset Brass Class J for around $300 on eBay. We'll start the model at 100 possible points. Like a lot of N-scale equipment, the engine comes in a clear plastic jewel case style box. Inside, a two-piece plastic cradle protects the model. A set of Arnold Rapido-style couplers are included. Sheets of paper are folded very tightly into the underside of the plastic cradle. One has warranty information and the other has lubrication instructions and exploded view drawings. Bachmann locomotives have a lifetime warranty. This is a good box that should protect the model for storage and transport. My Class J is decorated as number 611. The real 611 was built in 1950 and is still in existence. The locomotive is preserved at the Virginia Museum of Transportation. Overall, the model appears to match prototype photos very well. The paint job looks right and the major details are in the right places. It definitely captures the look of the real engine. The paint on the engine is somewhat thick to the point where it just starts to soften some of the rivet detail and boiler bands. The markings are crisp and the red stripe is opaque. The model has good detail, including freestanding grab irons and railings. Some of the grab irons would look better painted black or toned down to match the prototype. The shiny bare metal makes the model look a little toy-like. The piping detail below the cab has a tendency to fall off when the model is handled, but it's easy enough to put back in place. In front, the engine has a separately applied grab iron, uncoupling lever, and non-functional class lights. The pilot has the coupler in the closed position, but a working coupler can be installed if desired. In back, the stenciling on the rear of the tender is legible with magnification. There are more freestanding grab irons, a separately applied ladder, and a functional backup light. The N&W Class Js were semi-streamlined and had clean lines, but there's still good detail on top of the locomotive. The separately applied recessed bell is a neat feature. I like the semi-open vents on the top of the cab. Unfortunately, the doors don't actually move. The cab interior is open and has a backhead with some rudimentary detail. There's plenty of room to add more detail or crew figures. The top of the tender has a coal load and good hatch detail. There are separate metal grab irons here too, though I think they would look better painted black. The locomotive picks up current from the drivers only. There's a traction tire on the third driver on the fireman's side. The two middle drivers are geared. The other two are driven by the side rods. The tender has good brake system detail. An opening for a speaker is visible on the bottom. All 12 wheels on the tender are used to pick up current. The model comes with the front coupler in the hidden position. Since that's how 611 is seen most of the time, and I expect most modelers will leave it that way, I'm not going to score the front coupler. The body-mounted coupler on the tender is low according to the microtrain's height gauge, so I'm taking 5 points. The first three drivers are narrow in gauge. All but one of the wheel sets on the tender are also narrow in gauge. Regauging steam engine drivers is a big job, so I'm taking 5 points for each driver, plus another 5 for the tender. In fairness, the out-of-gauge wheels haven't caused any problems so far for me while running the locomotive, though I don't currently have a permanent layout and I only run the engine occasionally. Neither the engine nor the tender has any significant body wobble. The engine and tender together weigh 6.6 ounces. I measured a peak drawbar pull of 1 ounce even on my force gauge. The locomotive and tender are semi-permanently connected by a drawbar and cannot be easily separated. The drawbar does have a second slot to move the tender closer to the locomotive. Using it would require removing the plastic tubing over the pin at the front of the tender. Doing this might make the engine less able to negotiate tight curves, but it would look more realistic. I previously installed the LokSound Select DCC sound decoder in this model, so that may have some effect on the engine's performance. My function key assignments are pretty standard. F0 turns on the headlight. It's set up for Rule 17 lighting, which means that the front light is bright when the engine is set to move forward and the rear light is dim. In reverse, the rear light is bright and the front light is dim. The logic seems to be part of the factory light board inside the tender, and it overrides the light settings in the decoder itself. So basically I can't get rid of this effect. I don't normally use Rule 17 lighting. F8 turns on the sound. I had to adjust the programming to sync the steam chaps to the driver rotation. F1 rings the bell. F2 blows the whistle. The length of the toot depends on how long the F2 key is pressed. The locomotive runs pretty well. There's a cleverly hidden dummy coupler on the front pilot. To use it, first remove the two tiny Phillips screws that hold the bottom cover in place. Lift off the bottom cover to release the coupler. The dummy coupler is molded on the back of the streamlined coupler cover. If you want to use it, reinstall the coupler cover with the coupler facing out. When open, the coupler will pivot. It almost looks like it should open and close without having to take it apart, but I couldn't get it to work on my model and I didn't want to break it. In the rear, Microtrains recommends an 1133 coupler conversion for this model. The 1133 conversion set includes a draft gearbox, a metal adapter, a coupler spring, and the two-piece coupler. Barbed tabs on the top of the draft gearbox are meant to lock into a slot in the bottom of the tender. This is a different Bachmann tender with the slot. Unfortunately, my model of 611 has an entirely different coupler setup. There's no way the 1133 conversion is going to be usable on my engine. It's possible that newer versions of Bachmann's Class J have a different tender setup. Since that isn't going to work, I'm going to attempt to fix the factory coupler. It looks like part of the problem with the low coupler is that the screw is slightly stripped out and won't fully tighten the draft gearbox lid. This is a set of 1.4mm by 3mm 0.3 pitch screws from Northwest Shortline, part 1143-5. These are a little bigger than the factory coupler screw, and I found that I could use one of these to replace the original screw. I'm holding the draft gearbox lid with some pliers to keep it from spinning while I'm installing the new screw. It's important to check to make sure that the coupler moves freely side to side. Looks good. Unfortunately, the coupler still droops, but at least now it won't fall off the engine. I removed the coupler again and decided to file some material from the cast-on part of the draft gearbox. This should reduce the vertical play in the coupler. After putting it back together, the coupler matches the Microtrain's height gauge. If you have a DCC-ready version of this model and want to install a decoder, you'll need to remove two screws in the bottom of the tender. Once the screws are out, the tender shell will lift off. Inside the tender is a factory circuit board. It includes a connector for the locomotive. I've already installed a LokSound Select microdecoder in this model. The instructions mention a dummy plug, but I had to solder the wires from my decoder to contact pads on the factory board. It could be that more recent versions of this model have an improved circuit board. Since the wheel gauge issue hasn't been causing any issues running on Kato Unitrack so far, and since this is an engine I only use on occasion, I'm going to leave the drivers alone for now. The tender wheels can be removed by carefully prying them out. Unfortunately, I couldn't figure a way to use my NWSL wheel puller as intended to re-gauge these wheels. I was able to use it and a pair of needle nose pliers to pull one of the wheels off the axle completely. Then I pushed it back on and pushed the wheels together until they matched the NMRA gauge. I've owned this model for several years and it spends most of its time in the box. When I do take it out to run it, it runs very smoothly. Though it has a few issues, I think the Bachmann Class J is a good model overall. It wasn't too difficult to add DCC and sound. I'd feel comfortable buying it again if I wanted another one. Having said that, let's see what we've got. The rear coupler was low and the model had 3 out-of-gauge drivers and out-of-gauge wheels in the tender, so I took a total of 25 points in the standards in operation category. That leaves us with 75 out of 100 possible points, which would be a C on a report card. The out-of-gauge drivers are a difficult thing to fix, so I'm giving this model a yellow signal. Overall, this is a pretty decent model from Bachmann. If you're looking for an N-scale Class J locomotive, then I think you might like it.